Hi, welcome back to another Econ podcast with Mr. Hagan. On this podcast, we're going to continue to talk about investing. And whenever we do, I want to remind viewers that this video is not designed to be investment advice. Its purpose is educational only. This video and other videos on this playlist are designed to teach about different theories of investing. If you want investment advice, please see the professionals. All right, so we're going to continue talking about investing, and we're going to actually now start to look at the second theory of investing. The first theory of investing, remember, said this. The first theory of investing said that we want to figure out the intrinsic value of a company, the real value of a company. And that's hard work because you have to calculate the company's what you think their earnings are going to be, what do you think their dividends are going to be, and then from that, you could calculate the yield, the P ratio, the PD multiple. It's all a lot of hard work. And the second theory of the stock market is going to say, forget about all that. The second theory of the stock market is called castle in the air or the greater fool theory. Now, I'll explain those names here a little bit later. This theory of the stock market was promoted is probably too strong of a word, was described by John Maynard Keynes. So John Maynard Keynes, the great economist, whether you're a Keynesian or not a Keynesian, whether you agree with this guy or not, his argument was that we should not analyze intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is not where investors would be best spending their time. Instead, we should think about the behavior of crowds. Instead of trying to figure out who's going to have the best earnings and dividends and P ratio and PD multiple and all that kind of stuff. Instead, we're just going to analyze the behavior of crowds. We're going to try to figure out how crowds behave, and that's going to bring a little bit of psychology into our analysis, because what we're going to be trying to do is not to analyze what we think is going to be the most profitable company, etc. We're going to try to figure out which company we think everybody else is going to like. And that's quite a bit different. In fact, Keynes is going to describe this as investing being more like picking the winner of a beauty contest. So let's say that you make a bet on who you think is going to win a beauty contest. You're going to bet with somebody on who's going to win the beauty contest, and maybe there's 100 contestants in this beauty pageant, and you're making a bet with somebody as to who you think is going to win that beauty pageant. Well, you wouldn't want to. What an intrinsic value person would do is they would, look at all the pictures of the people in the beauty pageant, and who has the nicest hair and the prettiest eyes and things like that. That would be like an intrinsic value analysis. But that's not what Keynes is saying. Keynes is saying that what you should do is, if you want to win the bet, if you want to try to figure out who's going to win the beauty contest, you don't want to figure out who you think is the most beautiful person. You want to try to figure out who you think everybody else thinks is going to be the most beautiful person. So instead of trying to figure out who's the prettiest, you're trying to figure out who everybody else is going to think is the prettiest. Okay, so that's kind of a confusing concept. Maybe another way of saying that is, instead of choosing the most attractive candidate, don't choose the most attractive candidate as the one to bet on, but bet on the one that you think everybody else thinks is the most attractive. Okay? It's what everyone else thinks that's going to drive the market. So, in other words, Keynes says this: successful investing is anticipating the anticipations of others. Anticipating the anticipations of others. Okay, let's take a look at an example of this. Maybe will help us think about this concept. So here's the great tulip mania. The great tulip mania that happened in the 1600s is actually from 1634 to 1637, and tulips. All of a sudden, people got excited about these new tulips that were coming in. I think it was in Denmark that the tulip was introduced to at this time. I forget. I'd have to go look that up. But either way, tulips were introduced to this new area that did not have tulips before, and people got excited about tulips, and so they started wanting to buy tulips. And so as they started wanting to buy, people wanted to buy more tulips. You can see here's 1634 to 1637. and on the vertical axis is the price of tulips. And what you can see is that the price of tulips, as people wanted to buy more of them, plant them in front of their homes and so forth, the price of tulips started to go up, and that'd be very reasonable at that point. But then what happened is some people started to realize that they could make money off of tulips. They didn't want to buy tulips because they thought tulips were pretty. They weren't buying tulips because they wanted to plant them in front of their house. They started buying tulips because they thought that if they bought the tulips today, say at this price, that they would be able to sell the tulips sometime in the future at a higher price. Okay, so they weren't doing any kind of intrinsic value study on the tulips. They weren't trying to figure out, which tulips were the better tulips, which ones would last longer, which ones would bloom for a longer period of time. That's not what they were doing. They were simply saying, if I buy these tulips today, do I think that other people will pay a higher price for tulips in the future? You see, I am trying to anticipate the anticipations of others. Do I think other people will be willing to pay a higher price for tulips in the future? And then, of course, this went crazy. This became known as tulip mania. This went into tulip mania because this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The very act of buying tulips causes the price to get bid up, which causes me to think, oh my goodness, that means I'm going to be able to get a higher price for tulips again in the future, which means I would now be willing to buy tulips at this price because I believe I can sell them at an even higher price tomorrow. This is why we would call it the greater fool theory. The greater fool theory, it simply says this: I'm not buying tulips because I think they're a good deal, okay? In fact, right here, I think tulips are way overpriced compared to what they used to be. I'm not buying tulips at this price because I think they're a good deal. I'm buying tulips at that price. I know it's foolish. I know the price is too high, but I think there will be even a greater fool who will pay an even higher price in the future. Okay, get the idea? We're not worried about intrinsic value, earnings, dividends, P ratios, PT multiples, all those kind of things. We're not doing serious analysis of the company. We're simply saying this: I know the price is too high. I know that it's foolish to pay this price, but I'm willing to pay it anyway because I believe there's an even greater fool that will pay an even higher price sometime in the future. Okay? But here's the problem. You wouldn't want to be the greatest fool. Okay, because there did get a time these prices kept getting bid up, and everybody, oh yeah, I'll buy tulips because I think someone will pay an even higher price, and then somebody did, and then you say, oh well, I'll buy tulips there because I think someone will pay an even higher price, and somebody did, and then you say, I'll buy even more tulips because I think someone will pay an even higher price, and somebody did. But at some point, the crowd begins to awake. The crowd begins to realize this is crazy. Who's paying $60 or whatever for a box of tulips when there really used to be like $1 2 years ago? Who would possibly be willing to pay this price? And then all of a sudden everybody panics and tries to sell their tulips at once. And then of course the price collapses down to here. So you don't want to be the greatest fool. So in other words, the idea here is that you want to buy tulips before everybody else buys them, and you want to sell them before you think everybody else is going to sell them. That's what I mean when I say successful investing is anticipating the anticipations of others. That's what I mean by that concept. So let's just talk about two more things then here before we finish up on this video. Why is it also called the castle in the air theory? Well, firm foundation is based on something firm. If you think of a house, it's a firm foundation that has a basement to it. Okay, it's based on real things, dividends and earnings and yields and PE ratios. Castle in the air, yeah, there's no foundation, right? It's just kind of floating up there. There's no real good strong foundation for arguing why we're buying the company or not. So castle in the air or the greater fool theory. So what creates a successful investor? A successful investor is someone who wants to buy before everybody else buys and sell before everybody else sells. So how in the world do we know how to do that? Well, let's just take a look here at our rules for successful investing, and then on the future video we'll talk about how these guys would try to do this. So successful investors, it simply comes down to this: for the castle in the air theory, it comes down to this: you want to buy before euphoric buying periods, and you want to sell before panic selling periods. You want to buy before euphoric buying and sell before panic selling. So if we just go back to this graph one more time down here at the bottom, we want to buy before the euphoric buying starts, and you want to sell before the panic selling. Okay? But let's just say that's much easier said than done. How do you actually put that into practice? We'll talk about that on some future videos. All right, this has been Mr. Hagan on another Econ Podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next Econ Podcast.